A 5-year-old girl sits frozen at the dinner table. Her parents watch as her small hands stop moving. The fork clatters against the plate. Her eyes lock onto something invisible in the corner of the room, something no one else can see. Her mother reaches across the table, calling her name, but the child doesn't respond. She hasn't spoken a single word since birth. Doctors diagnosed her as selectively mute. Therapists tried everything. Nothing worked. But tonight, something is different. Her lips begin to move. A whisper escapes, then grows louder. Her voice, raw and unused, cuts through the silence like a blade. "I was Anne Frank," she says. "I remember the attic. I remember hiding. I remember when they came for me." The room goes cold. Her father drops his glass. Water spreads across the table like a slow, creeping dread. The girl's eyes remain fixed on that empty corner, tears streaming down her face as she repeats the words again and again. Before we continue, subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. 3 months earlier, the Harrison family moved into a small house on the outskirts of Portland. Emma Harrison was born without complications, a healthy baby who smiled and laughed like any other. But as months turned into years, her parents noticed the silence. She never cried for attention, never called for her mother, never said a word. Specialists ran tests. Brain scans showed normal function. Vocal cords were intact. There was no physical reason for her silence. Some children develop differently, the doctors said. Give it time. But time only deepened the mystery. Emma communicated through gestures and drawings mostly. She was intelligent, observant, and strangely aware. Her mother, Claire, often felt watched by her daughter, not in a frightening way, but in a way that suggested Emma understood things she shouldn't, things beyond her years. Claire dismissed it as maternal paranoia until the drawing started. It began with simple sketches, houses, trees, flowers, normal for a child. But then the images changed. Emma drew buildings with narrow windows, people huddled in small rooms, dark figures with sharp angles. Claire found one particular drawing tucked under Emma's pillow. It showed a room with bookshelves, a staircase behind them, and a small door. The detail was disturbing, too precise, too architectural for a 5-year-old. Claire showed it to her husband David, who shrugged it off. "Kids have wild imaginations," he said, but Claire couldn't shake the feeling that Emma wasn't imagining anything. She was remembering. The night Emma spoke, everything changed. After those first impossible words left her mouth, she collapsed. Her body went limp, and her parents rushed her to the emergency room. Doctors found nothing wrong. No fever, no neurological issues, just exhaustion. When Emma woke up hours later, she stared at her mother with eyes that looked too old. "I couldn't breathe," she whispered. "They took us away. I couldn't breathe in the train." Claire felt her blood turn to ice. She had never told Emma about the Holocaust, never mentioned Anne Frank. The child had no access to history books or documentaries. How could she know? Over the following days, Emma's vocabulary exploded. She spoke in full sentences, sometimes in English, sometimes in fragments of other languages. Claire recorded her on a phone one afternoon. Emma sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, arranging toy blocks into shapes. "Het was donker," she murmured. "Zo donker." Claire didn't recognize the language. Later, she played the recording for a linguist friend. "That's Dutch," the friend said, face pale. "She's saying it was dark. So dark." Claire's hands trembled. Emma had never been exposed to Dutch, never heard it spoken. The linguist listened to more recordings. Emma mentioned names: Edith, Otto, Margot, historical names tied to Anne Frank's family. "This is impossible," the linguist whispered, "unless she's—" Claire refused to finish that sentence. But the evidence kept mounting. Emma began drawing detailed maps, not just the room with the bookshelf, but entire layouts, hallways, windows. Dimensions that matched historical records of the secret annex in Amsterdam, where Anne Frank hid during World War II. Claire, desperate for answers, contacted historians. She sent them Emma's drawings. The responses came back quickly. each one more unsettling than the last. "These are accurate," one historian wrote, "down to details we only confirmed through recently discovered architectural plans. How does she know this?" Claire had no answer. She watched her daughter play with dolls, whispering to them in a language that shouldn't exist in her mind. David remained skeptical. "It's a coincidence," he insisted. "She probably saw something on TV." But even he couldn't explain the night terrors. Emma woke up screaming 3 nights in a row. Not the frightened cries of a child waking from a nightmare. These were screams of someone reliving trauma. "They're coming!" she shrieked. "I hear the boots. They're coming up the stairs." Claire held her daughter as she thrashed and clawed at the air. Emma's eyes were open, but she wasn't seeing the bedroom. She was somewhere else, somewhere dark, somewhere final. When she finally calmed down, she looked at her mother with heartbreaking clarity. "I died there," she said softly. "I died, and I came back. But I remember everything." Claire made a decision that night. She contacted Dr. Helena Voss, a psychologist specializing in childhood trauma and past life regression cases. Dr. Voss had published papers on children who claimed to remember previous lives, a phenomenon dismissed by mainstream science but documented in enough cases to warrant serious study. When Dr. Voss arrived at the Harrison home, she spent an hour alone with Emma. What emerged from that session would shatter every rational explanation. Emma described the secret annex in vivid detail: the smell of mildew, the sound of church bells from the Westertoren, the cramped quarters, the fear that soaked into the walls. She named people who lived there. She described daily routines. She spoke about writing in a diary, pouring her thoughts into pages because there was nothing else to do. Dr. Voss recorded everything. Later, sitting with Claire and David, her face was grave. "I've studied over 200 cases of children claiming past life memories," she said. "Most can be explained. Overheard conversations, media exposure, unconscious absorption of information. But Emma..." She paused. "Emma knows things that aren't publicly available, details that only archival researchers would know, and she's displaying signs of post-traumatic stress linked to events from 80 years ago." David stood up, pacing. "This is insane. You're telling me my daughter is the reincarnation of Anne Frank?" Dr. Voss shook her head slowly. "I'm telling you that your daughter has memories that shouldn't exist, whether that's reincarnation, genetic memory, or something else entirely I don't know. But something is happening here that we can't ignore." Claire felt the walls closing in. She looked at Emma through the doorway. The little girl sat on the couch, staring at an old photograph Dr. Voss had brought, a photograph of the Frank family. Emma's finger traced the face of a young girl in the picture. "That's me," she whispered. "That was me." The story spread quickly. Dr. Voss, bound by ethics but driven by scientific curiosity, shared the case with colleagues. Within weeks, journalists caught wind of it. Claire and David tried to protect Emma from the media storm, but it was too late. News vans parked outside their home. Reporters knocked on their door at all hours. Headlines screamed, "Mute girl speaks, claims she was Anne Frank." The attention was suffocating. But worse than the media was what came next. Other families started coming forward. A mother in Ohio called Claire, sobbing. Her 6-year-old son, also mute since birth, had started speaking. He claimed he was a boy who died at Auschwitz. He knew details about the camp. He had nightmares about gas chambers. A family in London reported the same phenomenon. Their daughter spoke for the first time, describing a ghetto in Poland. Then another case in Australia, another in Brazil. All children who had been mute, all now speaking, all claiming to have died in the Holocaust. Dr. Voss compiled the reports. 12 children in total, all between the ages of 5 and 7, all previously mute, all sharing memories of death during World War II. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Something was happening. Something global. Something that defied every law of nature and reason. Claire read the reports with growing horror. These children weren't just remembering. They were connected. Several of them mentioned the same recurring dream, a darkness spreading, a voice calling them, a warning. "They're coming back," Emma told her mother one night. "Not the same way, but they're coming, and this time they know where to find us." Claire didn't sleep that night. She sat by Emma's bed, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall. The child looked peaceful, but Claire knew better. Behind those closed eyes, Emma was somewhere else, somewhere terrifying. And whatever was happening, whatever force had awakened these children, had only just begun. The first word Emma spoke was a crack in a dam, and now the flood was coming. Dr. Helena Voss stood in front of a wall covered in photographs, maps and timelines. Her office looked less like a psychologist's workspace and more like a detective's war room. Red strings connected images of 12 children scattered across 4 continents. Each child shared the same impossible story: born mute, suddenly speaking, claiming memories of the Holocaust. She'd spent 3 weeks interviewing families, recording sessions, and cross-referencing their stories. The consistency was what disturbed her most. These children weren't repeating things they'd heard. They were describing experiences with sensory details that couldn't be fabricated. The smell of smoke, the texture of wooden bunks, the taste of watered-down soup, the sound of screams echoing through concrete corridors. Dr. Voss had seen cases of false memory before. This wasn't that. This was something else entirely. She focused on the case files spread across her desk: Emma Harrison in Portland, Liam Chen in Ohio, Sophie Bergman in London. Each file contained transcripts of interviews, drawings, and medical records. The children had never met. Their families didn't know each other. There was no network connecting them. Yet their stories aligned in ways that couldn't be coincidental. Liam described being separated from his mother at a train platform. He drew the platform with detailed accuracy, matching historical photographs of the Westerbork transit camp in the Netherlands. Sophie spoke in fragments of Yiddish, a language her parents didn't speak and she had never been taught. She sang lullabies her grandmother recognized from pre-war Poland. Dr. Voss played the recordings for historians and Holocaust survivors. The reactions were always the same: shock, tears, disbelief. "That song," one elderly woman said, her voice breaking. "My mother sang that to me. I haven't heard it in 70 years. How does this child know it?" Dr. Voss had no answer. She was a scientist. She dealt in observable phenomena and testable hypotheses. But nothing about this situation fit into any framework she understood. She contacted colleagues in neuroscience, genetics, and even quantum physics. Could memories be passed down genetically? Could consciousness transcend physical death? The responses ranged from skeptical dismissal to cautious intrigue. One physicist sent her a paper on quantum entanglement and consciousness. "If information can exist in superposition across time and space," the email read, "then perhaps memory isn't as bound to individual biology as we think." It was speculative, fringe science at best, but Dr. Voss was running out of rational explanations. The children themselves were changing. Emma's night terrors intensified. She woke up screaming about trains, about being packed into cattle cars with no air, no light. Claire Harrison called Dr. Voss in the middle of the night, desperate. "She's hurting herself," Claire sobbed. "She scratches at her arms. She says she's trying to get the numbers off." "What numbers? She doesn't have any numbers." But Dr. Voss knew what Emma meant. Concentration camp prisoners were tattooed with identification numbers. Emma was trying to erase marks that didn't exist on her skin, but burned in her memory. Dr. Voss drove to the Harrison home immediately. When she arrived, Emma sat in the corner of her room, rocking back and forth, whispering in Dutch. Dr. Voss knelt beside her. "Emma, you're safe," she said gently. "You're not there anymore. You're here. You're home." Emma looked up, her eyes red and swollen. "But they're still there," she whispered. "All of them. Still trapped, still waiting, and something is pulling them back." That phrase haunted Dr. Voss. Something is pulling them back. She heard variations of it from other families. Liam told his parents that he felt called. Sophie said she heard voices in her dreams, voices of children who died, telling her to remember. Dr. Voss began to suspect that these weren't isolated cases of reincarnation. They were part of something larger, something intentional. She reached out to a colleague in Tel Aviv, Dr. Miriam Katz, a Holocaust historian who specialized in survivor testimonies. Dr. Katz had heard rumors of similar cases, children in Israel exhibiting the same behavior, speaking about camps they couldn't possibly know. Dr. Katz flew to Portland to meet with Dr. Voss and Emma. The two women sat in the Harrison living room while Emma played on the floor. Dr. Katz watched the girl carefully. "May I speak with her?" she asked. Claire nodded hesitantly. Dr. Katz knelt beside Emma and spoke in German. Emma's head snapped up. She responded fluently. Dr. Katz's face went pale. The conversation continued for several minutes. When Dr. Katz stood up, her hands were shaking. "What did she say?" Claire asked. Dr. Katz's voice was barely above a whisper. She described Bergen-Belsen, not Auschwitz, not the secret annex, Bergen-Belsen, where Anne Frank died. She described the typhus epidemic, the cold, the bodies piled outside the barracks. She used words that only survivors would use: Vernichtung, Appell, selection. Claire felt the room spin. "How is this possible?" Dr. Katz shook her head. "I don't know. But if this child truly carries those memories, then she's not just remembering Anne Frank's life. She's remembering her death." The implications were staggering. Dr. Voss compiled all the data and presented it at a closed conference of psychologists, historians, and parapsychologists. The audience listened in stunned silence as she played recordings, showed drawings, and detailed the consistency across cases. When she finished, the room erupted in debate. Some called it mass hysteria, others suggested media contamination. But a few, the ones who had studied similar phenomena for decades, leaned forward with grim recognition. "This has happened before," one elderly researcher said. "Not on this scale. But there are documented cases throughout history. Children remembering past lives, particularly traumatic ones. The difference now is the synchronicity. They're all waking up at the same time. Why?" That question hung in the air, unanswered. Dr. Voss returned to Portland with more questions than answers. She continued sessions with Emma, trying to understand not just what the girl remembered, but why she remembered it now. During one session, Emma drew a picture that made Dr. Voss's blood run cold. It showed 12 children standing in a circle holding hands. Above them a dark shape loomed, formless, hungry. "What is that?" Dr. Voss asked, pointing to the shadow. Emma didn't look up from her drawing. "It's what's coming," she said simply. "It found us before. It's finding us again." Dr. Voss felt a chill crawl up her spine. "What do you mean it found you?" Emma finally looked up. Her eyes were ancient, filled with knowledge no child should possess. "The hate didn't die," she said. "It just went to sleep, and now it's waking up." Dr. Voss knew she was out of her depth. This wasn't psychology anymore. This was something else, something that required answers she didn't have the tools to find. She made a decision that would change everything. She contacted the other families and proposed bringing the children together. If they were connected, if they shared something beyond individual memories, then perhaps putting them in the same room would reveal the truth. It was risky. It could traumatize them further. But Dr. Voss felt a growing urgency. These children weren't just remembering the past. They were warning about the future. And if their warnings were real, then time was running out. The meeting was arranged at a private facility in upstate New York. 12 families traveled from around the world. Security was tight. Media was kept away. Dr. Voss watched as the children entered the room one by one. They had never met, never seen each other's faces. But the moment they laid eyes on one another, something shifted. Emma walked straight to Liam and took his hand. Sophie moved to Emma's other side. One by one, the children formed a circle, just like in Emma's drawing. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They stood there, connected by something invisible and unbreakable. The parents watched from behind observation glass. tears streaming down their faces. Dr. Voss stepped into the room cautiously. "Hello," she said softly. 12 pairs of eyes turned to her in unison, and then, in perfect synchronization, they spoke, not in one language, but in many: English, Dutch, German, Polish, Yiddish, Hebrew. The words blended together into a chorus that filled the room with haunting harmony. "We remember, we survived, we returned, and we will not forget." The room fell silent. Dr. Voss felt tears on her own cheeks. These children weren't just individuals recalling past lives. They were vessels, carriers of collective memory, witnesses to atrocity, and their awakening was a message, a warning, a call to remember. Dr. Voss documented everything. The session lasted 2 hours. The children spoke about their deaths, about the camps, about the loss. But they also spoke about something else, a presence, a force that fed on hatred and fear. "It's growing again," Emma said. "We can feel it. It's in the world. The anger, the blame, the division. It's the same energy, the same darkness." Liam nodded. "We came back to warn you, to remember, so it doesn't happen again." Dr. Voss published her findings in a controversial paper titled "Collective Trauma and Transgenerational Memory, The Case of 12. It was dismissed by mainstream academia, mocked by skeptics, but it reached the people who needed to see it: survivors, historians, those who understood that some truths transcend explanation. The paper ended with a chilling conclusion. These children may be an anomaly, or they may be a sign, a signal that history is not as past as we believe, and that the forces which drove the darkest chapter of human history are not extinct. They are dormant, waiting. And if we do not remember, if we do not learn, they will rise again. The facility in upstate New York became a temporary home for the 12 children and their families. Dr. Voss arranged for accommodations and continued observation in a controlled environment. She wanted to understand the depth of their connection. The parents, desperate for answers, agreed to stay. The first few days were quiet. The children played together like any group of kids their age. They laughed, they ran, they seemed normal. But at night, everything changed. The nightmares came in waves. Emma woke up screaming at 3 in the morning. 10 minutes later, Liam woke up screaming. Then Sophie, then the others, all within the same hour, all describing the same dream. They were in a dark place, cold. The smell of ash filled their lungs. Shadows moved in the distance, closing in. And then a voice, low and menacing, whispered words they couldn't quite understand but felt in their bones. Dr. Voss monitored them through night vision cameras. She watched as the children, still asleep, began to move. They left their rooms and walked down the hallways. Not together, but individually, as if drawn by an invisible thread. They converged in the common room, standing in that same circle formation. Dr. Voss rushed downstairs with her assistant. When she entered the room, the children were standing perfectly still, eyes closed, hands linked. Their mouths moved in unison, whispering something too faint to hear. Dr. Voss stepped closer, activating a voice recorder. The whispers grew louder. It was a prayer, the mourners' Kaddish, a Jewish prayer for the dead. But these children had never been taught it. Yet they recited it flawlessly in Hebrew, their voices blending into one haunting melody. When the prayer ended, the children opened their eyes simultaneously. They looked at Dr. Voss, fully awake now, confused about how they'd gotten there. "We were dreaming," Emma said. "All of us. The same dream." Dr. Voss nodded, heart pounding. "What did you see?" Emma glanced at the others. They exchanged looks, communicating in that silent way they'd developed. "We saw the place where we died," Emma said quietly. "But it wasn't just memory. It was like we were there again, like something pulled us back." Sophie stepped forward. "It wants us to remember," she said, "but not just for us, for everyone. It's angry that people are forgetting." Dr. Voss felt a chill. "What is it?" The children looked at each other again. Finally, Liam spoke. "The souls, the ones who died. They're not at rest. They're trapped between the past and now. And they're trying to speak through us. Dr. Voss brought in a rabbi, a scholar specializing in Jewish mysticism and concepts of the soul. Rabbi Eli Cohen listened as the children described their experiences. He asked them questions in Hebrew, testing their knowledge. They answered with ease. He showed them religious texts they'd never seen. They pointed out passages, explained meanings. Rabbi Cohen's face grew more troubled with each passing minute. When the session ended, he pulled Dr. Voss aside. In Jewish tradition, there's a concept called Gilgul Neshamot, the transmigration of souls. It's believed that souls can return to complete unfinished tasks or to correct past wrongs. But what these children describe goes beyond individual reincarnation. They're speaking as if they're channels, conduits for collective memory. Dr. Voss leaned against the wall. Is that possible? Rabbi Cohen hesitated. In mystical texts, it's said that great traumas can bind souls together, that the souls of martyrs remain connected, watching over the living. If that's true, then perhaps these children aren't remembering their own past lives. They're remembering the lives of millions. The theory was both beautiful and horrifying. Dr. Voss shared it with Dr. Katz, who had remained at the facility. Dr. Katz paced the room, processing the information. If they're connected to collective memory, then they're accessing something like a shared consciousness, a repository of trauma. But why now? Why these children? Dr. Voss pulled up a timeline on her laptop. Look at the dates. Emma started speaking 3 months ago. Liam 2 weeks later. Sophie a week after that. The others followed in rapid succession. What was happening in the world during that time? Dr. Katz scanned the timeline. Her face went pale. The rise in anti-Semitic incidents, hate crimes spiked globally, Holocaust denial rhetoric increased online, nationalist movements gained traction. Dr. Voss nodded grimly. It's a pattern. As hate rises in the present, these children awaken in the past. It's as if the collective trauma is responding to current threats, a warning system. They presented the theory to the parents. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Claire Harrison spoke first. You're saying my daughter is some kind of alarm, that she's suffering because the world is repeating its mistakes. Dr. Voss chose her words carefully. I'm saying that Emma and the others may be connected to something larger than themselves, and their awakening is significant, not just psychologically but spiritually, historically. David Harrison stood up, anger flashing in his eyes. This is insane. You're turning our children into symbols, into some mystical phenomenon. They're just kids. They deserve normal lives. Dr. Katz spoke gently. They're not just kids anymore, Mr. Harrison. They're witnesses. And if we ignore what they're telling us, we do so at our own peril. The tension in the room was palpable, but before anyone could respond, the lights flickered. Once, twice, then went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. The children, who had been playing in an adjacent room, began to scream, not in fear, in agony. The adults rushed to them. The children were on the floor, writhing, clutching their heads. Emma's voice rose above the others. It's happening again! We're there! We're back! Dr. Voss tried to reach her, but Emma's body convulsed. The other children mirrored her movements. It was as if they were all experiencing the same physical trauma simultaneously. Dr. Katz grabbed a medical kit, unsure what to do. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The lights came back on. The children went limp, breathing heavily, sweat soaking their clothes. Emma sat up slowly. Her eyes were different, darker, older. She looked directly at Dr. Voss. It's not just memory, she said, voice strained. It's happening now, somewhere in the world, right now. People are being hunted, marked, and the same evil that took us is taking them. Dr. Voss felt her heart drop. What do you mean? Emma's hand shot out, grabbing Dr. Voss's wrist with surprising strength. Check the news. Check the world. It's already begun. Dr. Voss pulled out her phone with trembling hands. She opened a news app. The headline hit her like a punch to the gut. Mass detention of ethnic minority reported in Eastern Europe. Thousands missing. The article detailed camps, forced labor, children separated from parents. It was happening again. Not identical to the Holocaust, but chillingly similar. The patterns, the rhetoric, the machinery of dehumanization. Dr. Voss looked at the children. They stared back at her with knowing eyes. "We told you," Emma whispered. "We warned you. The darkness never died. It just waited." The room spun. Dr. Voss felt the weight of realization crushing her. These children weren't just remembering the past. They were connected to the present. They felt the echoes of atrocity in real time. And their awakening wasn't random. It was a response, a desperate attempt by history itself to prevent repetition. Dr. Katz gripped Dr. Voss's shoulder. "What do we do?" Dr. Voss looked at the 12 children, fragile and powerful all at once. "We listen," she said. "We document. We make sure the world hears them. Because if we don't, if we ignore this warning, then their suffering means nothing. And history will repeat itself until there's no one left to remember." The parents, shaken and terrified, agreed to continue. The children, exhausted but resolute, sat together in a circle once more. They held hands, drawing strength from each other. Emma spoke for all of them. "We didn't choose this. We didn't ask to remember, but we do. And now you know. So what are you going to do about it?" The question hung in the air, demanding an answer. Dr. Voss knew that everything had changed. This was no longer a study. It was a mission. These children were a message from the past, a warning in the present, and a hope for the future. And she would make sure their voices were heard, no matter the cost. News of the 12 children spread beyond the confines of the facility. Despite efforts to maintain secrecy, leaks occurred. Journalists tracked down families. Social media exploded with theories, from the plausible to the absurd. Skeptics dismissed it as coordinated fraud. Believers called it proof of the soul's immortality. Religious groups debated theological implications. Scientists demanded access for testing. The world was divided, but one thing was certain: the story couldn't be contained. Dr. Voss faced mounting pressure from media, academics, and governmental agencies. The facility became a circus. Protesters gathered outside, some holding signs that read, "Let the children speak," others declaring, "Hoax of the century." Dr. Voss made a difficult decision. She agreed to a controlled press conference with strict conditions. The children would not be present. Only documented evidence would be shared, and the focus would remain on the message, not the spectacle. The conference took place in New York City. Hundreds of journalists packed the auditorium. Dr. Voss stood at the podium, flanked by Dr. Katz, Rabbi Cohen, and a panel of experts in neuroscience, psychology, and history. She presented the findings methodically, recordings of the children speaking in languages they'd never learned, drawings that matched historical documents, testimonies verified by Holocaust survivors. The room buzzed with murmurs and camera flashes. Then Dr. Voss played a video. It showed the 12 children standing in their circle, reciting the mourners' Kaddish. The audio was haunting, the synchronization unnatural. When the video ended, silence filled the auditorium. Dr. Voss let it hang before speaking. "These children are not performers. They are not coached. They are experiencing something we do not fully understand. But the consistency, the accuracy, and the urgency of their message cannot be ignored. They are telling us that history is repeating, that the patterns of hatred and dehumanization are re-emerging, and they are begging us to remember, to learn, to act." A journalist stood up, skeptical. "Dr. Voss, how do you rule out the possibility that these children absorbed information unconsciously, through media, conversations, or cultural osmosis?" Dr. Voss anticipated the question. "We have conducted exhaustive background checks. These children had no access to the specific information they possess. Some details they provide are not in public record. They are archival, known only to researchers. Additionally, the simultaneous nature of their awakening across multiple continents, with no contact between families, defies conventional explanation." Another journalist challenged. "Could this be a case of mass suggestion, folie à plusieurs?" Dr. Katz stepped forward. Mass delusion requires a shared environment and influence. These children were isolated from each other until recently. Their testimonies emerged independently. The convergence is what's remarkable. The questions continued for over an hour. Some were genuine inquiries. Others were accusatory. Dr. Voss handled each with professionalism, but she could feel the fatigue setting in. Then a question came that shifted everything. A woman in the back stood up. She identified herself as Naomi Stern, a descendant of Holocaust survivors. Dr. Voss, you mentioned these children are warning us. What specifically are they warning us about? Dr. Voss paused. This was the question she'd been dreading and anticipating. They speak of a darkness that never died, a force, whether metaphorical or literal, that feeds on hatred and division. They claim this force is resurgent. They point to current events, rising hate crimes, ethnic violence, authoritarian regimes targeting minorities, as evidence that the conditions which enabled the Holocaust are reappearing. Their warning is simple: remember, or it will happen again. Naomi Stern's eyes filled with tears. And do you believe them? The room held its breath. Dr. Voss looked directly at her. I believe they believe it, and I believe we ignore them at our peril. The press conference ended shortly after. Reactions were immediate and polarized. Some media outlets praised Dr. Voss for bringing attention to rising intolerance. Others accused her of exploiting children for political gain. But the message resonated. Within days, the hashtag #WeRemember trended globally. Survivors shared their stories, activists organized rallies, schools implemented Holocaust education programs. The 12 children hidden away in the facility became symbols of memory and resistance. But symbols come with a cost. The children's health began to deteriorate. The seizures, which had been sporadic, increased in frequency and intensity. Emma stopped eating. She said food tasted like ash. Liam developed severe anxiety, refusing to be in enclosed spaces. Sophie's hair started falling out, a psychosomatic response to stress. The other children exhibited similar symptoms. Dr. Voss consulted medical specialists, but no physical cause could be identified. The trauma they carried was manifesting in their bodies. Claire Harrison confronted Dr. Voss one evening. "This has to stop," she said, voice breaking. "My daughter is wasting away. I don't care about warnings or messages. I want my little girl back." Dr. Voss felt the weight of guilt. "I understand, Mrs. Harrison, but I don't know how to stop this. It's not something I initiated. It's something that's happening to them." Claire's anger flared. "Then find a way to end it. They're children, not martyrs." Dr. Voss had no response. She returned to her office and stared at the wall of evidence. Everything pointed to a phenomenon beyond her control. But there had to be something, some way to ease their burden. She reached out to experts in trauma therapy, energy healing, and even exorcism, anything that might offer relief. One response stood out. A psychiatrist specializing in dissociative disorders suggested that the children might be experiencing a form of collective dissociation, where their identities were merging with the memories they accessed. If that's the case, the email read, then grounding techniques, identity reinforcement, and separation from triggering environments might help. Dr. Voss proposed moving the children away from the facility, back to their homes, to see if distance and normalcy would sever the connection. The families agreed. Over the next week, each family returned home. Dr. Voss monitored them remotely. For a few days, it seemed to work. The children slept better. The seizures decreased. Emma even smiled again, playing in her backyard like a normal 5-year-old. Claire allowed herself to hope, but hope was short-lived. On the 10th night, Emma woke up screaming, not from a nightmare, from pain, physical searing pain. Claire ran to her room and found Emma clutching her left forearm. Her skin was red, inflamed, and there, forming on her arm, were marks. Not a rash, not hives. Numbers, burned into her skin as if branded by an invisible hand. Claire screamed. David called emergency services, but before they arrived, Emma's pain subsided. The numbers remained. a sequence that matched the identification number of Anne Frank's sister, Margot. The paramedics were baffled. There was no physical source for the burn, no chemical, no heat, just the mark. Dr. Voss received frantic calls from other families. Liam developed similar marks. So did Sophie. Each child bore numbers corresponding to historical victims. Dr. Voss drove through the night to reach the Harrison home. When she arrived, Emma sat calmly at the kitchen table, tracing the numbers on her arm. "They're not letting go," Emma said softly. "We're still connected, and they want the world to see." Dr. Voss examined the mark. It was real, physical, impossible. She took photographs, documented everything. "Does it hurt?" she asked. Emma shook her head. "Not anymore. It's just there. A reminder. For me, for everyone." Dr. Voss felt tears welling up. This wasn't just psychological. Something beyond comprehension was happening. These children were being marked, claimed by the past. She compiled the evidence and sent it to colleagues worldwide. The response was immediate and divided. Some called it stigmata, a religious phenomenon where individuals bear wounds corresponding to historical suffering. Others insisted it was dermatological, explainable through stress-induced skin conditions. But the specificity of the numbers, their historical accuracy, couldn't be dismissed. Dr. Voss knew the truth, even if she couldn't prove it scientifically. These children were chosen, marked, vessels for memory that refused to fade, and their suffering was a testament, a living, breathing reminder that the past was never truly past, that the souls lost in the Holocaust were still speaking, still demanding to be remembered. The world watched, some with reverence, others with fear, but the children, marked and weary, continued their mission. They spoke to anyone who would listen. They told their stories, not as individuals, but as echoes of millions. And slowly the world began to change, not dramatically, not universally, but in small ways. People listened, schools taught, memorials were visited, and hate, in some corners, was challenged. The children had become what they were always meant to be, witnesses, not just to what was, but to what could be again. And their voices, fragile yet unbreakable, carried a message that transcended time. Never forget, never again. 6 months after the press conference, the 12 children had become icons. Their faces appeared on magazine covers, documentaries were filmed, books were written. But fame brought new dangers. Extremist groups targeted them, calling them frauds, propaganda tools, threats to revisionist narratives. Security around the families tightened. Dr. Voss received death threats. So did the parents. The children, despite their young age, understood they were in the center of something much larger than themselves. Emma, now 6 years old, spoke with a clarity that unnerved adults. "They're afraid of us," she told her mother, "because we make them remember. And remembering means they have to change." Claire held her daughter close, torn between pride and terror. The turning point came during a live television interview. A major network arranged for 3 of the children, Emma, Liam and Sophie, to appear together, with their parents present. Dr. Voss advised against it, fearing the stress would trigger another episode. But the families, feeling a sense of duty, agreed. The interview was broadcast globally. Millions watched as the children sat side by side, small and vulnerable under the studio lights. The host, a seasoned journalist, approached them gently. "Emma, can you tell us why you think you're here? Why this is happening to you?" Emma looked directly into the camera. Her eyes, impossibly old, held the gaze of viewers around the world. "We're here because you're forgetting," she said. "You're letting hate grow again. You're letting people be hurt again. And we came back to remind you what happens when you forget." The host shifted to Liam. "Liam, you've said you remember dying. Can you tell us what that was like?" Liam's voice was soft but steady. "It was cold and dark, and I was alone. But I wasn't just me. I was everyone who died there. Their pain was my pain. And it's still here. It never left." Sophie added, "We carry them. The souls, they live in us and they're crying. They're crying because it's starting again. The camps, the hate, the lies, and no one is stopping it. The studio fell silent. The host, visibly moved, asked the question everyone wanted answered. What do you want people to do? The three children spoke in unison, their voices blending into one. Remember, speak, act. Don't let history repeat. The interview went viral. Clips were shared millions of times. Educators used it in classrooms. Politicians referenced it in speeches. But not everyone was moved. Hate groups intensified their attacks. Conspiracy theories spread, claiming the children were actors, that the whole thing was staged by shadowy organizations. Dr. Voss fought back, providing more evidence, more documentation, but she knew that no amount of proof would convince those determined to deny. The battle wasn't just against ignorance, it was against willful blindness, against the refusal to confront uncomfortable truths, and that battle was far harder to win. Then something shifted. A major political figure, a senator known for inflammatory rhetoric, made a speech denying the Holocaust. He called it exaggerated, politicized, a tool of manipulation. The speech was met with applause from his base, but it was also met with something else. Within hours, the 12 children released a coordinated video. They didn't have publicists or handlers. They simply sat in their homes, looked into their phone cameras, and spoke. Emma started. "Senator, you say it didn't happen. But I remember the trains, the camps, the gas. I remember dying." Liam continued. "You say it's a lie, but I carry the truth in my body, in my mind, in my soul." Sophie added, "You say we should move on, but how can we move on when it's happening again, when people like you make it possible?" One by one, the other children added their voices. The video was raw, unedited, and devastating. It spread faster than any campaign ad, faster than any political statement. It reached people who had never heard of the Holocaust, people who thought history was boring or irrelevant, and it forced them to look, to listen, to feel. The senator's approval ratings plummeted, sponsors dropped him, his political career was effectively over. But more importantly, the conversation shifted. People began asking uncomfortable questions. How did we get here? How did hate become acceptable again? What can we do to stop it? The children, fragile and powerful, had catalyzed a reckoning. Dr. Voss watched it all unfold from her office. She felt a mix of pride and sorrow. These children had sacrificed their innocence for a cause they didn't choose. They bore trauma that wasn't theirs but was, in a way, everyone's. She continued to monitor their health. The physical marks remained, faint but visible. The nightmares persisted. But something else emerged. Resilience. The children formed a bond stronger than family. They supported each other through the worst moments. They celebrated small victories together. They became a community, a living memorial, a testament to survival and remembrance. Dr. Voss documented everything, knowing that one day their story would be studied, analyzed, and hopefully understood. Years passed. The children grew older. The intensity of their memories faded slightly, though never disappeared. Emma, now 10, still had moments where she slipped into Dutch, where she described the secret annex as if she'd just left it. But she also laughed. She made friends. She lived. The other children did the same. They attended schools, played sports, pursued interests. But they never forgot. And they never stopped speaking. They became advocates, activists, educators. They traveled to Holocaust memorials. They met survivors. They told their stories to new generations. And slowly, imperceptibly, they changed the world. Not by grand gestures, but by persistent, unwavering testimony. By refusing to let the past be buried. By insisting that memory matters. Dr. Voss wrote a book. It was part memoir, part case study, part philosophical exploration. She titled it The Marked Ones, When History Refuses to Die. It became a bestseller, translated into dozens of languages. She used the proceeds to establish a foundation supporting Holocaust education and research into trauma and memory. The 12 children were involved, serving as advisors and spokespeople. They understood their role. They were bridges between past and present, between the dead and the living, between forgetting and remembering. And they carried that role with grace, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, a ceremony was held at the site. Emma, now a young woman, stood before a crowd of thousands. Survivors sat in the front row, their numbers tattooed on their arms. Emma looked at her own arm, where her marks had faded but never vanished. She spoke without notes. "I stand here not as Emma Harrison, but as a voice for those who cannot speak. I carry memories of a girl who died here, a girl named Anne, and a girl named Margot, and countless others whose names we'll never know. I didn't choose this, but I accept it, because if my voice can prevent even one person from experiencing what they experienced, then my burden has meaning." She paused, looking at the survivors. "You lived. You survived. You told your stories so we would remember, and we do. We will. Always." The crowd rose in a standing ovation. Tears flowed freely. Emma stepped down from the podium and walked to the survivors. She embraced them, one by one. They held her, these elderly men and women who had endured hell, and they whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for remembering. Thank you for carrying us forward." Emma felt the weight of their gratitude and their grief. She understood that this was her purpose, to be a bridge, to be a witness, to be a voice. And as she stood there, surrounded by history and hope, she felt the presence of those who had passed, the souls, the ones who spoke through her. And for the first time in years, she felt peace, not because the pain was gone, but because she knew it mattered. Her life, her suffering, her voice, it all mattered, and that was enough. The ceremony ended. The crowd dispersed, but Emma stayed. She walked through the camp, touching the walls, feeling the cold stone. She whispered names: Edith, Otto, Margot, Anne, and thousands more. She whispered them into the wind, into the earth, into the air. A prayer, a promise, a vow. We remember. We will always remember. And we will never let it happen again. The wind carried her words across the empty camp, across the world, across time. And somewhere in the space between memory and eternity, the souls heard, and they rested, not forgotten, not silenced, but honored, remembered, alive in the voices of the living. And that, Emma understood, was all they ever wanted: to be remembered, to matter, to ensure that their deaths meant something, that their lives meant something. And as long as she and the others spoke, as long as the world listened, they would never truly die. They would live on, in memory, in warning, in hope, forever.